The cost of rent has increased by over 5.5% in the past 12 months, the highest year-on-year rise since mid-2019. That is according to the Daft.ie latest rental report, which also found that supply was at an all-time low. And Ronan Lyons, economist at Trinity College in Dublin and author of the report, joins us now. Ronan, just give us the sort of the thrust of the report. What are the big standout figures here? It looks entirely bleak with such a low supply and such a climb in rent.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these kinds of reports, there's lots and lots of figures, and you mentioned one of the key ones there. The national average increase is 5.5% roughly year on year. That's how much the typical rent has increased in the market. But that national average really hides differences. In Dublin, rents are just about higher, so they're about 0.5% higher than a year ago, and that's a tale of two halves. In the second half of 2020, rents were falling, and they've been rising the last 6 months or so. So that does suggest that perhaps a corner has been turned in the Dublin market. People are returning, but still rents are only about 0.5% higher. In the rest of the country, however, we're seeing effectively record increases in rents. For example, to take one county, in Kerry, rents are 16.5% higher than they were a year ago, and there's nothing like that in the 15 years of the Daft report, and it's a story that's repeated across rural Ireland in terms of the rental markets, and it's really a story of a lack of supply. It's the familiar problem to those in the cities over the last 5-6 years that has just been exported to the rest of the country with COVID-19. Very few homes available on the rental market at the moment.
And according to this, something like 800 houses in total, or premises in total available to rent outside Dublin. Is that correct? That seems like a minuscule amount.
That's right, and it's kind of hard to get your head around how small that is. And to put it in context, even 2 years ago when things were very tight, there were about 1,800. And if we go back 10 years, when there were the balance of power in the rental market was very different, renters had the upper hand compared to landlords. There were 15,000 properties available to rent outside Dublin at any particular point in time. Okay. Now there are just 800.
Front of the Irish Independent this morning, Ronan, rents rising because landlords are selling to cash in on the property price boom. We keep hearing, and we have heard for a long time, about cuckoo funds and vulture funds and these sort of, buy to let and build to let. We hear about that idea as a negative, but do we actually need buy to let and build to let because we have such a small available supply of rental properties?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the country nationally over the last nearly 15 years at this stage, we've had no new rental accommodation, next to no new rental accommodation built. And yet, at the same time, we have significantly more population now and more people renting now than 10 or 15 years ago. It's not sustainable for us to not have new rental accommodation built. And the kinds of companies that build rental accommodation in the rest of Europe should be allowed, should be able and encouraged to build rental accommodation here. I think the frustration is when it's seen that they're the only ones building. And in that case, we need to move the conversation beyond kind of either or. It's either this or that kind of accommodation that gets built, to realise that we need all of these things. Yeah. We need owner-occupied housing, social housing and professional rental accommodation. And we need lots of all of these kinds of homes
Even
built,
the government's
not just for 1 year.
Cost rental scheme looks quite small in terms of what's actually necessary. Just another story that caught our eye this morning here in the papers as well, front of the Irish Times. Co-op house for sale with a 50% price increase. These were those houses in Ballymun that were for sale at 30% below market rates back in 2018. Affordable housing, they were heralded as a great thing because they were built quite cheaply and they were sold quite cheaply. Someone now has owned that house for 3 years and has offered it at a 50% markup. So that strikes me as certainly very possibly adhering to every letter of every law, but the spirit of affordable housing in that development seems to be challenged by this. Should something else happen?
Yeah, I mean, this gets to the core issue. You can't solve, for example, this problem of there being only a few hundred homes available to rent in the entire country. You can't solve that by rent caps. You can only solve that by additional rental housing. And in the case you've given there, again, that person is acting in their own interest, yeah. and why not? But if we want to build, for example, social housing, we shouldn't fall into the same trap we have done in the past, where we build the social housing and then give people a way to effectively profit from it that they they can sell it. Something they got at a discount, they sell for full market price. And that's the reason we have so few social homes, social housing in this country compared to other countries, is that we had built it in the past and then sold it off. If we build new, for example, cost rental housing, the taxpayer pays for it, the taxpayer should keep it. And you keep the social housing in the social housing sector. And similarly with rental accommodation, if we designate rental accommodation, as we have tried to do with build-to-rent schemes, is that that's the idea behind that, is they stay in the rental accommodation sector, rather than, as the Independent is reporting, you have a different kind of rental sector and it gets sold off if conditions change.
Okay. Yeah, while supply is so low, all of these things are going to continue to happen. Look, thank you very much for that insight this morning. That is Ronan Lyons, economist at Trinity College in Dublin and author of that report.